Friday, December 22, 1944. Snow covers the Ardennes forest in thick, uneven layers, muffling sound and slowing movement across the narrow Belgian roads. Visibility is poor, temperatures are brutal, and Allied commanders are still struggling to understand the full scope of the German offensive that has erupted just days earlier. At Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, the atmosphere is tense and uncertain. Reports arrive hourly, many of them contradictory. German armored columns have punched deep into the Allied lines. American units have been cut off, and for the first time in months, the outcome of operations on the Western Front feels genuinely unstable. It is in this moment of pressure and confusion that General George S. Patton makes a decision whose speed will alarm not the enemy, but his own side. Patton is commanding the U.S. Third Army, positioned far to the south of the main German thrust. On paper, his forces are oriented eastward, preparing for continued advances into Germany once the front stabilizes. The German attack through the Ardennes has shattered those assumptions. Entire American divisions are now engaged in defensive battles under extreme conditions, and the town of Bastogne has become a focal point of strategic importance. The German objective is clear: split the Allied front, capture Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace in the West. Time is the decisive factor, and every hour of delay increases the danger. At a command conference in Verdun, Patton listens as Eisenhower and senior Allied commanders debate possible responses. Many options are discussed cautiously, framed by logistical realities, weather constraints, and the fear of exposing flanks. Patton, however, has already been planning. Long before the German offensive began, he had instructed his staff to prepare contingency plans for a sudden change of direction. While other armies must now begin the slow process of reorganizing, Patton is ready to act immediately. When Eisenhower asks how long it would take the Third Army to pivot north and attack the German flank, Patton delivers an answer that stuns the room: 3 days. The reaction is immediate and skeptical. Moving an entire army, hundreds of thousands of men, thousands of vehicles, artillery, fuel, ammunition, and supplies, across winter roads in the middle of an active enemy offensive is not something Allied doctrine considers feasible. Staff officers exchange glances. Planners quietly calculate the risks. Eisenhower, aware of both Patton's brilliance and his reputation for recklessness, presses him for clarity. Patton does not hesitate. His staff has already issued preliminary movement orders. His divisions are prepared to disengage, turn 90 degrees, and move north in coordinated columns. What alarms Allied headquarters is not merely the ambition of the plan, but the speed at which it is already unfolding. Patton is not waiting for exhaustive approvals or detailed synchronization with adjacent commands. He understands that delay will cost lives at Bastogne and allow German forces to consolidate their gains. To Patton, hesitation is the greater risk. To many of his peers, speed itself has become the danger. As orders ripple through Third Army units, confusion is inevitable. Supply officers scramble to reroute fuel convoys. Engineers assess frozen bridges and narrow roads never intended to support such traffic. Infantry units prepare to move under conditions that test endurance and morale. Yet the movement begins almost immediately. Columns roll north day and night, headlights masked, drivers navigating icy roads with minimal rest. Accidents occur. Vehicles slide into ditches. Breakdowns accumulate. Still, the advance continues. At higher headquarters, unease grows. Patton's maneuver exposes his southern flank and temporarily disrupts carefully laid operational plans. There is concern that German forces might exploit this movement, launching secondary attacks or isolating forward units. Communications struggle to keep pace with events. Reports from Patton's headquarters are confident, even blunt, emphasizing progress rather than problems. To some Allied commanders, this tone borders on insubordination, reinforcing fears that Patton's speed is outpacing control. The pressure on Eisenhower intensifies. He must balance the immediate tactical necessity of relieving Bastogne with the broader strategic risk of allowing one commander too much freedom. Patton's previous controversies weigh heavily in the background. His history of defying convention, pushing boundaries, and courting danger is well known. Now, in the middle of one of the most critical moments of World War II, that same behavior threatens to disrupt Allied unity even as it promises decisive results. By December 26, the lead elements of the Third Army reach the outskirts of Bastogne. The speed of the advance astonishes both friend and foe. German commanders, expecting a slower Allied response, are caught off guard. Patton's armor punches through resistance and establishes contact with the besieged defenders. The immediate crisis is broken, but the implications of how it was achieved ripple through Allied command structures. Behind the front lines, staff officers continue to debate whether Patton's success justifies the risks he took. Some argue that only such speed could have saved Bastogne. Others warn that relying on individual audacity undermines coordination and long-term stability. The question lingers unresolved. Had the maneuver failed, the consequences could have been catastrophic, not only militarily but politically. As the Ardennes campaign continues, Patton's rapid movements become both a weapon and a source of anxiety. His army operates at the edge of logistical sustainability, forcing constant improvisation. Each success reinforces his belief that momentum is decisive. Each near-miss reinforces Allied fears that speed, when unchecked, can be as dangerous as enemy fire. In the weeks that follow, the German offensive collapses under mounting pressure from multiple directions. Patton's Third Army plays a central role in driving the enemy back, reclaiming lost ground, and restoring Allied initiative. Yet even as victory becomes more certain, the debate over Patton's methods does not fade. His speed has delivered results, but it has also exposed fault lines within the Allied command, raising enduring questions about control, risk, and the limits of individual command in coalition warfare. As winter tightens its grip on the European front and preparations begin for the final push into Germany, Patton continues to move faster than those around him expect or prefer. His actions force Allied leaders to confront an uncomfortable reality of World War II, that under extreme pressure, success often depends on decisions made before consensus can form. And that speed itself can reshape the course of war, while simultaneously threatening the very structures meant to direct it. As January 1945 unfolds, the momentum created by that winter maneuver does not slow. The Third Army presses eastward again, now fighting through terrain scarred by weeks of intense combat. Roads are cratered, villages are reduced to rubble, and the logistical strain that once alarmed Allied headquarters has become a constant condition rather than an exception. Patton's headquarters operates with relentless urgency, issuing orders that assume movement first and adjustment later. For staff officers trained in methodical planning, this approach remains unsettling, yet the battlefield continues to reward speed over caution. Within Supreme Headquarters, the experience of the Ardennes has altered expectations. Patton's rapid pivot is no longer viewed as an anomaly, but as a precedent that complicates future decision-making. Commanders begin to ask whether similar speed might be required elsewhere, even when conditions appear unfavorable. This creates friction, as not every army possesses the same internal discipline or command culture. The question is no longer whether Patton moved too fast, but whether the Allied system itself is capable of keeping pace with the realities of modern, mechanized warfare in World War II. German forces, meanwhile, are struggling to respond. Fuel shortages, shattered communications, and the loss of experienced officers have eroded their ability to counter sudden Allied thrusts. Intelligence reports intercepted in early January reveal confusion among German commanders, many of whom misjudge the size and intent of Patton's movements. The speed that alarmed Allied planners now generates uncertainty within the enemy's ranks. forcing hurried redeployments that weaken already fragile defenses along the Siegfried Line. Patton interprets this hesitation as opportunity. He pushes reconnaissance units far ahead of the main body, probing for gaps, testing resistance, and reporting back in near real time. These forward elements operate under constant risk, often beyond reliable artillery support. Losses occur, sometimes heavily, but Patton accepts them as the price of momentum. To him, stopping to consolidate invites enemy recovery. To his critics, it risks outrunning protection and supply. At command meetings, Eisenhower increasingly finds himself mediating between competing philosophies of warfare. Montgomery emphasizes deliberate preparation and secure flanks. Bradley focuses on maintaining cohesion across American forces. Patton argues that the enemy is collapsing faster than the maps suggest, and that delay only gives them time to recover. The tension is not personal alone. It reflects deeper uncertainty about how the war should now be fought as Germany weakens, but remains dangerous. As the Third Army crosses into German territory, civilian encounters add another layer of complexity. Rapid advances leave little time for military governance or stabilization. Towns change hands quickly, sometimes without clear lines of authority established. Reports of displaced civilians, prisoners of war, and liberated labor camps reach Allied headquarters sporadically, filtered through the haze of rapid movement. Speed delivers breakthroughs, but it also creates gaps in understanding that will later demand attention. By February, Patton's forces are engaged in bitter fighting along the Saar and Moselle rivers. Winter conditions persist, and resistance stiffens as German units defend their homeland. Here, speed no longer guarantees easy success. River crossings are costly, and artillery duels dominate the landscape. Yet even in these conditions, Patton refuses to slow his operational tempo. Attacks are launched as soon as bridges are seized or constructed, often before neighboring units are fully aligned. Allied commanders watch closely. The earlier alarm has not disappeared. It has evolved into wary acceptance. Patton's speed is now seen as both asset and liability, something to be directed rather than restrained outright. Orders become more carefully worded, granting flexibility while emphasizing coordination. Whether this balance can truly be achieved remains uncertain, especially as the war approaches its final, most decisive phase. The pressure of impending victory reshapes every decision. Resources are finite, casualties are mounting, and political considerations loom larger with each mile advanced. Patton senses that the end is approaching and fears that hesitation now could prolong the war unnecessarily. His critics fear the opposite, that reckless speed could provoke unnecessary losses just as Germany's defeat is assured. As spring draws closer, the Third Army continues its relentless drive, its pace still faster than many find comfortable. The alarms raised months earlier have not been silenced. They echo quietly in planning rooms and after-action reports. Yet on the ground, the consequences of speed are written in captured bridges, shattered enemy formations, and a front line that moves almost daily. In the unfolding final months of World War II, Patton's velocity remains a force that shapes events faster than consensus can ever fully catch up. By early March 1945, the Third Army's advance has carried it deeper into the heart of Western Germany, where the terrain itself begins to dictate the limits of speed. Rolling hills give way to river valleys and dense urban clusters that channel movement into predictable corridors. Patton understands that velocity now depends less on open maneuver and more on the rapid reduction of fortified towns and crossings. Orders emphasize combined arms coordination at a tempo that still feels hurried to subordinate commanders, who must synchronize infantry, armor, engineers, and artillery almost simultaneously. The Rhine looms as the central strategic barrier. Allied planning has long treated the river as a line requiring careful preparation, massive engineering effort, and tightly coordinated assaults. Patton, however, sees it differently. To him, The Rhine is not an endpoint but another obstacle to be exploited at the moment of enemy weakness. Reports filtering in from reconnaissance and intelligence units suggest German defenses along certain stretches are thinner than expected, undermined by exhaustion and the cumulative effects of constant retreat. This assessment again puts Patton at odds with prevailing Allied caution. Supreme Headquarters debates timing and allocation of resources for a deliberate Rhine crossing, wary of repeating the costly mistakes of earlier river assaults in Italy and France. Patton presses his staff relentlessly for options, probing for any opportunity that would allow his army to cross ahead of schedule. The memory of earlier alarms about his speed resurfaces, shaping how his proposals are received. This time, they are not dismissed outright, but neither are they fully embraced. When elements of the Third Army unexpectedly seize intact bridges across smaller rivers feeding the Rhine, Patton reacts instantly. Units are ordered forward without waiting for comprehensive approval. Engineers race to reinforce crossings under fire, while armored columns push through before German forces can regroup. These actions compress decision-making cycles to hours instead of days, forcing higher headquarters to react to events already in motion rather than shape them in advance. The consequences are immediate and mixed. On one hand, German resistance collapses in several sectors, their command structure unable to respond quickly enough. On the other, supply lines stretch dangerously thin. Fuel convoys struggle to keep pace, ammunition expenditures spike, and medical evacuation becomes increasingly complex as front lines leap forward. Staff officers log concerns that echo earlier warnings, noting that success is being purchased with growing operational risk. Eisenhower's response reflects the evolving balance between restraint and exploitation. Rather than halting Patton outright, Supreme Headquarters issues guidance emphasizing coordination with neighboring armies and air support, attempting to harness speed without letting it fracture the broader Allied advance. Air power becomes a crucial stabilizing factor, striking German movement and supply nodes ahead of Patton's columns, compensating for the risks inherent in rapid ground maneuver. As the Third Army reaches the Rhine, and in some areas crosses it faster than anticipated, the psychological impact is profound. Allied troops sense that the war's decisive phase has arrived. German soldiers, facing incursions into territory long considered defensible, experience a corresponding collapse in morale. The speed that once alarmed Allied planners now accelerates the unraveling of the enemy's remaining coherence. Yet even at this stage, uncertainty dominates. No one at headquarters can fully predict how long organized resistance will continue, or what political and humanitarian challenges will emerge as vast areas fall under Allied control. Patton's advance generates momentum that cannot easily be paused, compelling Allied leadership to adapt continuously rather than impose rigid plans. By late March, the Third Army is moving across central Germany, encountering scattered but fierce pockets of resistance. Each success reinforces Patton's belief that speed saves lives by shortening the war, even as casualty reports complicate that narrative. The alarms raised by his pace have not vanished. They have been absorbed into a larger recognition that modern war, especially in its final stages, often rewards those willing to act before certainty is complete. The series of decisions made under pressure, from the Ardennes through the Rhine and beyond, leaves a lasting imprint on Allied operations. Patton's speed no longer stands apart as an exception, but as a defining feature of the campaign's final months. As Germany's defeat draws closer, the question shifts from whether Patton moved too fast to how those choices, made amid uncertainty and risk, reshaped the closing chapter of World War II in ways that no single commander or headquarters could fully control. As April 1945 begins, the Third Army's forward elements are operating in an environment where traditional front lines have largely dissolved. German units appear and disappear with little warning, sometimes fighting stubbornly for a single crossroads or factory complex, then vanishing overnight. This fluidity amplifies the very pressures that have followed Patton since Normandy. decisions must be made faster than reliable information can arrive. Reports from Corps commanders are often outdated by the time they reach Army headquarters, forcing Patton to rely on instinct shaped by years of maneuver warfare, and an unshakable belief that hesitation now would only prolong chaos. The rapid advance exposes the human cost of speed in ways that are impossible to ignore. Columns of displaced civilians clog roads needed for military traffic, creating moral and logistical dilemmas that headquarters planners had only partially anticipated. Patton issues blunt orders to keep routes open, while civil affairs units struggle to establish control behind the spearheads. The contrast between operational urgency and humanitarian reality becomes sharper with each mile gained, underscoring that momentum carries consequences beyond purely military objectives. German resistance, though fragmented, occasionally concentrates with surprising ferocity. In cities along the Main and further east, improvised defensive groups employ anti-tank weapons in close terrain where Patton's armor cannot maneuver freely. Casualties rise in short, violent bursts. These encounters reinforce the uncertainty facing Allied commanders. No matter how weak the enemy appears overall, local superiority can still inflict significant losses. Patton's insistence on pressing forward forces subordinate leaders to balance aggression with caution at the lowest levels of command. At higher headquarters, the debate over Patton's tempo evolves rather than ends. Eisenhower and his senior staff recognize that the collapse of German coordination makes bold movement increasingly effective, yet they remain wary of overextension. Communications between Army groups emphasize boundaries and objectives, not to restrain Patton entirely, but to prevent his thrusts from creating exploitable gaps between Allied forces. The tension between centralized control and battlefield initiative persists, shaping orders that are deliberately flexible, sometimes ambiguously so. Air power continues to shape outcomes in subtle but decisive ways. Fighter bombers range far ahead of advancing columns, striking retreating German units and disrupting attempts to form coherent defensive lines. This aerial pressure magnifies the impact of Patton's speed, transforming rapid ground advances into psychological blows against an enemy already struggling to maintain cohesion. The coordination between air and ground units, refined over months of campaigning, becomes a force multiplier that partially offsets the risks of moving faster than plans initially envisioned. As the Third Army pushes toward the Danube and deeper into southern Germany, intelligence reports grow more complex. Indications of collapsing German command coexist with warnings about potential last-ditch defenses in alpine regions and industrial centers. Patton dismisses fears of a prolonged redoubt as exaggerated, but adjusts dispositions enough to guard against sudden counterblows. This balance reflects a maturing of his approach. Speed remains paramount, but it is now paired with selective consolidation where resistance hardens. The pressure on supply networks reaches a critical point. Fuel shortages temporarily slow certain units, forcing improvisation and prioritization that echo earlier crises during the breakout from Normandy. Patton's staff works continuously to redirect resources, often making decisions that commit scarce supplies to forward units at the expense of rear area stability. These choices illustrate how momentum, once achieved, demands constant reinforcement to avoid turning success into vulnerability. For Allied soldiers on the ground, the advance feels relentless and disorienting. Days blur together as towns fall in rapid succession, each marked by brief combat, hurried processing of prisoners, and immediate preparation to move again. The absence of a clear pause reinforces the sense that the war is nearing its end, even as the dangers remain acute. Patton's presence, often close to the front, reinforces this perception, embodying the philosophy that forward motion itself is a weapon. By mid-April, the cumulative effects of speed reshape Allied strategy almost by default. Plans adjust to realities created on the ground rather than preceding them. Patton's earlier alarms about overextension give way to a broader acknowledgement that the enemy's collapse has altered the calculus of risk. Decisions once considered reckless are now evaluated as necessary adaptations to a rapidly changing battlefield. The advance continues eastward under a constant haze of uncertainty, shaped by fragmented intelligence, strained logistics, and the unpredictable behavior of a defeated but still dangerous adversary. Patton's choices, forged under pressure and executed at speed, remain controversial within command circles even as they deliver tangible results. Each mile gained narrows the space for German resistance, while expanding the range of consequences Allied leaders must confront, ensuring that the final weeks of World War II are defined as much by the momentum of decisions already made as by any new plans drafted at headquarters.